Alright, my MT48 just arrived in the mail from Studio Économique in Montreal. Let's go open it up and take a look. It's a bit heavy. There it is, that's it. Yeah, the travel case is definitely really nice. I'm a little bit concerned about the noise that these fans will make, but we'll see when I test this thing out and start using it.
Hey nerds, I'm Chris, and I want to help you get beautiful recordings. So do you need a Neumann MT48 to get beautiful recordings? Well, I'm hoping that throughout this video, I can answer that question for you. This audio interface, it has a lot of really great features. It's kind of expensive, but there's a reason it's so expensive. We're going to explore these features. We're going to look at the sound quality, especially the preamps. I'm going to show you a comparison I did of these preamps and the preamps of other audio interfaces, as well as some standalone preamps. And I want to help you decide if this audio interface is the right fit for you and your studio. So I brought in a local artist, his name is Dustin, and we recorded a beautiful little song of his called My Little Blue Moon. I used the MT48 for almost all of the tracks, except for a couple MIDI tracks, piano and strings on MIDI, but everything else went through the MT48. Most of it went through the preamps and analog inputs on the MT48, except for recording drums. I've got 12 microphones on this drum kit, so obviously I can't use just the inputs on the MT48. I used a Focusrite Clarett 8 pre and paired that into the MT48 using ADAT. Now, something you might notice is I have a little bit of an unusual configuration for my drum overheads. You see, I just can't decide if I like the sound of condensers better or ribbon microphones better on drum overheads. If you've ever experimented with those two and you have a preference, I would love to know your thoughts. Just let me know in the comments section down below. And if you haven't experimented but you would like to know what the difference is, well, you can download all the raw tracks to this recording at Get.Beautiful.Recordings.com. I'll put the link in the description so you can use these tracks for mix practice or just for your own reference.
What am I saying?
I don't know.
I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. Yeah, we're recording electric guitar. Now, it's great that the MT48 has built-in effects, but it doesn't have a guitar amp simulation. And I want to record the electric guitar direct because I just love having that raw sound so that I can reamp later. So we're going to record the electric guitar DI, and I'm going to use the line level output and send that to my reamper and go into the guitar amp so that he can hear the guitar amp in real time. So let's get that all plugged in. So I'd like to do another take of what you did the previous time with the chuck.
Skanks? Yeah.
The chucks towards the end.
They're called skanks. Isn't that funny?
Skanks?
Yeah.
I did not know that.
I'll play some skanks for you.
All right, let's skank it up.
My little blue Oh, my little blue moon, you've gone away. So tonight I'll sit and stay, and day after day watch the hills take my little blue moon away. And day after day watch the hills take my little blue moon away. And day after day watch the hills take my little blue moon away.
So this is Neumann's first stab at making an audio interface. But it's actually not, because it's made by Merging Technologies. And I say this because let's take a look at another audio interface made by Merging Technologies. The Merging Technologies Anubis. Does this look familiar? It's got the exact same front panel layout and configuration of buttons. It's got slightly different configuration of inputs and outputs, but I really do think that the design of this was inspired by the Anubis. But I think it's worth noting that the Anubis is actually more expensive than the MT48. So let's take a look at what this interface is straight out of the box. You've got your combo mic inputs with XLR or 1/4 inch for line level, And then on the front, you've got your 2 1/4-inch inputs for an instrument or a high Z. It's got 8 outputs organized into 4 stereo pairs. Your headphone 1 is a stereo pair, headphone 2 is a stereo pair. On the back, you have a stereo pair of XLR outputs and a stereo pair of 1/4-inch outputs. You also have another pair of 1/4-inch outputs for MIDI. You can get a special little adapter to route MIDI in and out of this audio interface. Personally, I don't think that's really necessary because you can easily just get a USB to MIDI adapter and plug your MIDI gear into your computer through a USB port.
So the internal mixer is pretty straightforward and intuitive to use. From any menu, you simply hit the home button and this will bring you to the main mixer window. This is where you control the mix. You have 4 mixes you can choose from: monitor A, monitor B, headphone 1, and headphone 2. That's what they are by default, but they can be assigned to anything that you want. You have your input channels here, which display a waveform when there's audio coming in, and you can simply use the touchscreen to slide back and forth. You can select the slider for fine adjustments, and just touch down below for more options. For instance, if you want to adjust the preamp, you just tap on the parameter you want to adjust and use the rotary knob. And all 4 mixes are independent of each other, so whatever changes you make on one of the mixes will not be reflected in the other mixes. And you also have a mute button right up here. It'll turn red when it's muted, and that'll mute whichever mix you have selected. So right now I have headphone mix 2 selected, and so the mute button is affecting headphone mix 2. And when nothing is selected, the rotary dial controls your master volume.
So something I consider to be important in a professional quality audio interface is to have dedicated line level inputs. Now what I mean by dedicated is there are no preamps in the signal path. Now this is super important if you want to use a neutral sounding external preamp. I like to use a camera lens as an example. Now I've got this camera here and I like the lens that's on it. It's not bad, but I think this lens is a bit better. But even though I like both lenses, it would not be practical for me to mount this lens on this camera in conjunction with the current lens, because then I'm getting the worst of both lenses. The only way to actually realize the advantage of the better quality lens would be to remove this lens and use this lens instead. Now, a lot of audio interfaces, they use like the combo jacks on the front panel where the line input is on the same input as the XLR for a microphone. And what the electronic circuit does in those instances is it simply pads down the input. So it uses an electronic circuit to lower the volume of the input and then runs that input through the preamp to boost the volume again. So essentially, the sound is going through both preamps, which degrades the signal and adds a little bit of noise. So if I'm using an external preamp like my Camden EC2, which is a really high quality, low noise preamp, it'll completely defeat the purpose of it if I plug it into an input that has to run through another preamp. Now the Neumann MT48, it's got the 1/4-inch inputs on the front panel for your line level input, but it's also for an instrument input, and they almost fooled me with this because I just assumed that there's no preamps on this because it's a 1/4-inch input and it's for line level signals, but I was wrong. The first clue was going into the menu for line inputs 3 and 4, and you can actually adjust the gain of the preamp. And then I looked it up on the Neumann website, and under the product specifications, you can see line inputs 3 and 4 have a gain range of 0 to 66 decibels. That's a 66 decibel gain range. Inputs 1 and 2 have a gain range of 12 to 78 decibels. That's also a 66 decibel gain range. So if you have an external preamp that's super clean sounding and it has a really low noise floor, there's not going to be any benefit of using it with this interface because it is not possible to bypass the internal preamps, regardless of which input you use. So these are a very neutral sounding preamp. They don't impart any kind of coloration or character, and that's ideal for a preamp in an interface. If I want character, I've got other ways of adding character to the signal, and then I can also just take it out again or tweak with the settings a bit. Now I've done extensive comparing and testing of preamps and their noise floor, because published specifications are just not reliable. There's too many different specification standards, and sometimes manufacturers can kind of cheat a little bit and tweak it to make their specification look a little bit better on paper than what it is in real life. So I get my hands on as much gear as I can, and I do my own in-house testing. Now for testing the noise floor of the preamps, this was actually a difficult test to do because I had to get an input signal that has a noise floor that's lower than the noise floor of the converters. I used a 150 ohm source load that could be replicated, and I was able to very precisely calibrate the input gain. So let's take a look at this comparison test with all the preamps that I tested and see how the MT48 performed. The Neumann MT48 preamps measured a noise floor of 5.9 decibels. This is slightly more noise than the preamps in the SSL2, which measured a noise floor of 5.25 decibels. and the Universal Audio Apollo Twin, which measured a noise floor of 5.7 decibels. The MT-48 preamps measured less noise than the Universal Audio Volt series, the Focusrite Scarlett series, as well as several standalone preamps. Now, there's a lot of talk about the dynamic range of this thing, but I don't think most people realize what the real-world implications are of having a higher dynamic range. So on the analog to digital converters, this has a dynamic range of 138 decibels. And theoretically, what the results of this should be is a crazy low noise floor. Because you see, dynamic range and noise floor are directly related. Dynamic range is the range in volume that's available from the very quietest source that it can record up to the very loudest source that it can record. How wide is that range? Now, the quietest source that it can record is determined by the noise floor of the equipment. And then the loudest sound it can record is just like any other audio interface, it'll be 0 dBFS. So since the loudest part is a constant, it can't be changed. The only way to increase the dynamic range is to lower that noise floor on the bottom. So if there is that much dynamic range on this, then these inputs on line 3 and 4 should be the cleanest, quietest inputs that I've ever tested. But they're not. Not even close. You see, on the Neumann website where they specify that the analog to digital conversion has a dynamic range of 138 decibels, well, it probably actually does. I believe that, and it's probably true. However, there's a preamp in front of those converters which the sound has to pass through. You can't bypass it, and that preamp is going to add noise to the signal. So effectively, you're not actually going to be able to achieve that level of dynamic range. Now, this comes back to what I was saying earlier about it not having dedicated line inputs and that there's a preamp in those line inputs. You see, I've got this test I've done with many audio interfaces. I take a recorded signal at 96 kilohertz. If it's at a lower sample rate, you'll get noise from aliasing, so it has to be at a high sample rate. I'll just take that little clip, I'll play it out the line output of the interface and record it straight back into the line input of the interface. And then I'll take that newly recorded clip, play it out the output, record it back in. And then I'll just keep re-recording the newly recorded signal over and over and over. See, what happens when you do that is any noise generated by the analog circuit is going to be cumulative and it's going to add to the noise floor each time. So the noise floor is going to get louder and louder and louder each time it goes through. So I re-recorded it 200 times just to exaggerate the effect and make it more clear how much of a difference there is between different pieces of gear. Any interface that I've ever tested that has a dedicated line input, so a line input that does not have a preamp in it, has had a lower noise floor than what I got with the MT-48. So with the MT-48, after 200 regenerations, here's the signal before and after. Now you can clearly hear the noise that was introduced there. But any interface that doesn't have a preamp on the line input will get a much lower noise floor. Here's what a metric halo ULN8 sounded like after 200 regenerations. So even after 200 regenerations, the noise floor is almost inaudible. And this isn't a cherry-picked example, this is a fair representation of a normal result that I've been getting with other audio interfaces. So if you were to buy this audio interface, the first thing you need to do is download the latest firmware. I discovered this the hard way. I was having all kinds of issues, and at one point I even had to send a client home because I wasn't able to figure it out and get my recordings to work properly. I had emailed Neumann customer support twice. The first time was like 3 weeks ago. I was asking a question about the inputs and outputs, and the second time was about a week ago. I was asking about like, why doesn't this thing work properly? And anyways, I never did hear back from them. Hello? Hello? Hello, Neumann? Are you there? I'm so scared. And the startup time takes 1 minute and 3 seconds. That's a bit unreal. I've never seen an audio interface take that long to start up. Now I fast forwarded it here in the video so that you don't have to watch the whole thing go through, but you can see the timer on the side, and I just wanted to give you an idea of how long it actually takes to start up. By the way, if you're watching this video, it probably means you're a total nerd, just like me, and I would love to connect with you on my Facebook group. It's called Get.Pro.Recordings, so you can join that group and ask me anything you like, and I also post tips and tricks on a regular basis there. So if you're on Facebook, head over to Get.Pro.Recordings and check it out. Now, there's a lot of lower cost 2-channel or 4-channel interfaces on the market, so what does this one do that they don't? So the first and probably most obvious is this nifty little touchscreen display that you can control everything on. You can adjust all the various parameters right here on the interface itself, independently of a computer. So this is nice because it's one less thing for your computer to have to do. Now you do need to use software on the computer to access all of the advanced features on this, but that's more for the remote controlling and networking features that this interface has. Number 2, it has an advanced multi-channel mixer with effects for direct monitoring. You can easily dial in up to 4 custom mixes in real time while recording. This is a huge convenience, and it eliminates the need to monitor through the DAW, which causes latency. So when monitoring through this unit, the only latency you're going to get is from the ADDA converters, and at 44.1 kilohertz, that's going to be about 1 millisecond, which is pretty much nothing. If you want some tips on reducing latency in your own recording setup, I've got another video on that. I even share a tip where you can reduce the latency to literally zero milliseconds of latency in the headphone monitoring mix. So anyways, if that interests you, you can check out that other video. Number 3, in your headphone monitoring mix, you can instantiate effects. You've got EQ, compression, and reverb. It even routes the signal to your DAW on a separate channel so you can record it with the effects or without the effects or both. Although personally, I don't see much need for doing this. I prefer to just use plugins in the DAW, that way I can take my time to tweak it and get it perfect. But in a situation of live sound or live streaming, that feature could be super handy. Number 4, up to 32 inputs. Now the internal mixer is actually capable of 48 channels, but the drivers are only capable of streaming maximum of 32 channels to your DAW, and at higher sample rates, that gets lowered. There's 2 ways of getting the additional inputs into here. First is through the ADAT ports right here on the back. You can get up to 8 channels in and out. And then second is through the AES67 port. You can just route in and out however many channels aren't being used until you get the full channel count of 32 or 16, depending what sample rate you're at. So an example of a preamp that you could route into this Ethernet port in the back would be like the Millennia HV316, which is a 16-channel preamp that'll send all 16 channels into this unit through Dante or AES67. Number 5, and this is one of my favorites, is that it's future-proofed. Because it's class compliant and it can operate almost entirely through the touchscreen display, you don't need additional software. You can plug this into any Mac computer, past, present, and future, and it will always just work. So in 15 years from now, I think it's likely that most of those other audio interfaces will be obsolete. You know, new computers come out, new operating systems, software gets updated, but manufacturers don't continue support for a product that they made 10 or 15 years ago. So they're not going to continue to update that software so that it works on newer computers, and eventually the audio interface just won't work anymore. So in like 10 to 15 years from now, the vast majority of those other audio interfaces are going to be obsolete. Whereas this one here, I honestly believe in 20 to 30 years, it'll still be a perfectly functioning and still very high quality audio interface that'll keep up in any pro environment. Like take for example the DigiDesign 003 rack. That thing is like 20 years old and it's still a high-end interface even by today's standards. It just doesn't work on a newer computer for software reasons, but the hardware itself is still really high-end. Number 6. It's an awesome little monitor controller. The front panel configuration and the buttons that they chose to put on here are very well designed. Like these are the buttons that I would use all the time and they're right there for quick and easy access. Number 7, you can save snapshots of your settings. This is super convenient for like recording or performing with different groups at different locations. You just save all the settings. So if you're ever in that same environment again, you can just easily recall your settings for a quick plug and play setup. So now I'm going to talk about some things that I didn't really like with this interface. So number 1, I already mentioned this, but it belongs on the list, so I have to say it again, is that it doesn't have any line inputs without a preamp in the audio path. Number 2, the touchscreen display is small and it's not as responsive as like a touchscreen display on a smartphone or what I'm kind of used to with other touchscreens that I use. The fact that it's small means you can't fit as much information as you can on a larger page, so you just have to flip between menus a little bit more, which makes it a little bit more difficult and time consuming to find whatever it is that you want to adjust. Number 3, it has a reduced number of inputs at higher sample rates. So at one-time sample rate would be like 44.1 or 48 kilohertz. It's capable of streaming up to 32 input channels into your DAW. However, at 2-time sample rates, so 88.2 or 96 kilohertz, it's only capable of half of that. It's only capable of streaming up to 16 channels into your DAW. Also, the back panel ADAT ports only have 1 port for ADAT in and 1 port for ADAT out. So at 2-time sample rates, you only have half the number of available channels, so you'd have 4 channels in, 4 channels out over the ADAT connection. Let's look at the Focusrite Scarlett 18i20 for example. This also only has 8 channels of ADAT in and out, but it's got the second ADAT port so that it still supports its full channel count at 88.2 and 96 kilohertz. You see, higher sample rates capture the audio at higher resolution and therefore provides better sound quality. Number 4, I wasn't able to mirror the outputs. When I'm the audio engineer and I'm recording another person, I like to know exactly what they hear in their headphone monitor mix. But this interface didn't give me the option to do that. So I don't know if their mix is too loud, too quiet, if they can hear themselves clearly. And if you got an artist that's fairly new to recording, they might just think like, oh, okay, that's normal, and they won't tell you that their mix isn't very good, and it can affect their performance. Number 5, cluttery. Now it looks really nice sitting on the desk like this if you've got nothing plugged in it, or even if it's just got like a couple cables plugged in. But I mean, this thing has got like 4 ports on the front, a whole bunch of ports on the back. If you're actually using it as a multi-channel interface, which is what it's designed to be used as, you're gonna have cables coming out the front and the back, and it's gonna look really cluttered. In a professional studio, I think looking professional is an important part of it, because clients come in, they don't wanna see a mess on your desk. That's why I like using rack mount gear, because it just keeps the mess of cables all tucked away nicely in the back. But with this, you just don't have that option to keep the cables nice and neatly tucked away. Even though there's plenty of outputs on here, it doesn't support multi-channel mixing like Dolby Atmos or surround sound. And then there's a bunch of aspects of this audio interface that I still want to mention and talk about, but I wouldn't consider them to be pros or cons. They're just kind of neutral and on par with other high-end audio interfaces. So first off, the preamps. I mean, they're great preamps, don't get me wrong, and they're not any better than the average for high-end audio interfaces. I mean, sure, they're better than some of the audio interfaces, but there's also some audio interfaces that have better preamps than this. So number 2, it runs hot, like really hot. Like to touch it, the first time I had a session with this, I was surprised by like, whoa, you know? I mean, I guess it's fine. It doesn't hurt anything. It's meant to run hot. It's got the fans built in on the sides here, little fans, but like it gets really hot in my studio, and this thing was running hot, and the fans never even kicked in once. They never made any noise at all. So I guess they're okay. They only kick in case of emergency. Like if you're outside and it's sitting in the sun, or you got it on some other pieces of gear that get really hot. I'm super fussy when it comes to noise in my studio. So if these things made even the tiniest little bit of noise, I would be mentioning it, but they don't, so we're good. Number 3, it requires an external power source. It is not bus powered. So depending how you look at it, like I wouldn't say it's a pro or a con. Any other audio interface with this level of inputs and outputs also requires an external power supply. However, straight out of the box, it is just a 4-channel interface, and there are other 4-channel interfaces on the market that are bus powered. And it's a nice, small, compact unit, comes with a nice travel case that kind of infers portability. However, the fact that it requires external power makes it a little bit less portable. Now, I did actually test it with a little 12-volt booster battery and a USB-C adapter on the 12-volt battery, and it worked 100% just fine. So it can be portable if you bring some kind of a portable USB-C power source with you. Number 4, the preamps have a huge amount of gain, like massive. And I don't consider this to be a pro or a con because there's no benefit of having that much gain. The vast majority of other preamps that are available have a gain range of about 55 to 65 decibels. These have a maximum gain of 78. That's way higher. But the reason most preamps don't have that much is because it's just not needed. The limiting factor is the noise floor, because when you turn that gain way up, you're also turning the noise floor up, and so it doesn't make a difference to that noise floor whether you turn the gain up on the preamp or in the DAW. So even if you're recording like a really quiet source, or you're using like a dynamic microphone really far away, if you're in a situation where you require a lot of gain, it doesn't make any difference in that noise floor whether you turn the gain up on the preamp or in the DAW. So let's compare this audio interface to a few others that are on the market. In this graph, we compare the features of the Neumann MT48 with the SSL12, UAD Apollo Twin Quad, UA Volt 476, Metric Halo ULN8, and the Motu Ultralight Mark V. We can view the number of headphone outputs, number of discrete custom monitor mixes, whether or not it can have effects instantiated on the headphone monitor mix, the number of built-in microphone preamps, the noise floor of the preamps, which I measured, if it has dedicated line inputs, so line inputs that do not force the audio through a preamp, number of line level outputs, whether or not it's bus powered, has ADAT digital inputs, has ADAT digital outputs, has the ability to synchronize word clock with external converters, has additional digital expansion capabilities other than ADAT, if it's future-proof, value score based on my own scoring system, total number of analog inputs, additional specialized features, and the price. So I spent about 2 weeks working on this review video, testing this audio interface out in multiple situations and really getting to know it. During that time, I've had lots of people coming in and out of the studio, and they would see it sitting here on the desk, and I would tell them, yeah, I'm doing a review. And quite often they would naturally just ask, oh, so what do you think of it? And I'm going to share with you the same reply that I would give to them, my off-the-cuff, unfiltered response. It's not all that great, and for the price, I think there's better options out there. The preamps are excellent, but they're not any better than other high-end audio interfaces, so I'd say the preamps are about average for professional level recording equipment. But I feel like this audio interface is having a little bit of an identity crisis, where it has a lot of features, but those features don't complement each other very well. For instance, straight out of the box as you buy it, it's a 4-channel interface with a 48-channel mixer. Its price point puts it in the same league as high-end professional audio recording equipment, but there's certain aspects about it that are just consumer level. For instance, all of the analog inputs, including the 2 line inputs on the front, have a preamp in the audio path, so that completely defeats the purpose of using a high-end standalone preamp to try and get better sound quality. It doesn't support full channel count at higher sample rates. Like, that's something Behringer does. Although this interface has lots of outputs, it doesn't support multi-channel mixing like surround sound or Dolby Atmos. And don't get me wrong, the sound quality of this unit is great, but there's also a lot of other audio interfaces on the market that sound just as good at a much lower price point. So yeah, it has a lot of features, but it doesn't do any of them spectacularly well, and they kind of conflict with each other, so I generally wouldn't recommend it for most people. However, I was able to think of one instance where I would recommend it to people, and that's if you have a small band, like a 2-piece or a 3-piece band, and you do live performances or live streaming. You've got your 4 mixes that you could control, so you'd probably use monitor mix A for your front of house or for your live stream, and you can put effects on that, EQ, compression, reverb, make it sound great, and then your other 3 monitor mixes, send those to the artists so that they can hear themselves, and you can record the whole thing at the same time. In that unique situation, this audio interface would work fantastic. The other redeeming quality, as I talked about in the video, is that it's fairly future-proof. I really do think that in 30 to 40 years from now, this will still be a fully functioning and really high-quality audio interface. Even then, I still think it would fit in a high-level recording studio. So the future-proof aspect of this is definitely a great quality. So I hope you found this review helpful. I've got a lot more audio interface reviews coming up, so you might want to subscribe to this channel to check them out. I'm also working on an entire audio engineering course. It's going to go right here on this channel. So hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.